I think we've accidentally thrown away something valuable, and today I'm looking for it in the ordinary routines of a 1940s cottage kitchen. The hottest days are making me rethink the rhythm of my mornings. Before the sun gets too hot for the dogs, I like to walk to the beach while the world is still quiet. But as I walked this morning, I found myself thinking about something else. Somewhere along the way, ordinary days stopped feeling enough. I wanted to understand why. Have we mistaken convenience for a better way of living? Why do our to-do lists keep growing while our days feel less satisfying? People in the 1940s certainly didn't have easier lives. They had shortages, rationing and endless work to do. Yet they seemed to understand that looking after a home wasn't simply about getting jobs finished. It was about making good use of what they had and putting things right before they were forgotten. So today I thought I'd borrow a little of that spirit. Back at the cottage, the first thing waiting for me was a rather guilty sight. These silver teapots and milk jug have been sitting quietly on the dresser for far too long, gradually turning darker with every passing week. I left them because life became busy, and now I have reminded myself how easily beautiful things can disappear into the background when we stop noticing them. Silver has a patient way of waiting. At first it seems dull, but as the polish begins to lift away the tarnish, tiny details slowly return. Delicate engraving, curved handles, reflections that have been hidden for months. It's remarkable how something so familiar can suddenly feel new again. I sometimes think we imagine that older homes always look perfect, but I doubt they did. They were simply lived in by people who quietly dealt with little jobs before they became much bigger ones. Putting things right has its own kind of satisfaction. Today's lunch began with a marrow, one of those old-fashioned humble vegetables that remind us eating well was once less about spending more and more about making the most of what we already had. A kind, green-fingered neighbour had grown far more marrows than he could possibly eat and kindly offered me one. It seemed the perfect excuse to try a recipe that was very familiar during the Second World War. Marrows appeared on tables all over Britain in wartime, and anyone who had a 1970s childhood will probably remember them too, because they were easy to grow, wonderfully productive, and could feed a family without costing very much. Lentils were equally useful, stretching a meal when meat was scarce or expensive. It's funny how some foods quietly disappear from fashion. You rarely see marrows in the shops now, yet they're very generous vegetables. They ask for little and give so much in return. Almost everything else I needed was already here. Fresh herbs from the garden. A few ripe tomatoes warmed by the summer sun. The only things I had to buy were the lentils. And a little cheese to sprinkle over the top. By the later years of the war, cheese had returned in modest quantities, so just a little feels perfectly in keeping with the spirit of the recipe. There's something deeply satisfying about making a meal almost entirely from what is close at hand. Of course, cooking is never a solitary affair in this cottage. The rabbits are always convinced that whatever is happening in the kitchen must surely involve them. They weave happily around my feet, hoping for a dropped herb or an interesting leaf, supervising every stage with great enthusiasm. As the morning grows warmer, even they begin to slow down. Eventually, everyone searches for the coolest patch of shade. It settles down to wait for the hottest part of the day to pass. While the marrow cooks, I finish polishing my silver teapots and milk jug. The transformation is always more dramatic than I think it's going to be. Instead of dull grey, the teapots now catch the light beautifully, and all those lovely decorative details seem to come alive again. It's strange that polishing silver can feel almost old-fashioned now, perhaps because we've become used to replacing things rather than restoring them. Yet there's a quiet pleasure in bringing something back instead of buying something new. Lunch is ready. The marrow is soft, the tomatoes have sweetened in the oven, and the herbs have filled the kitchen with their scents. Simple food, honest food, the sort of meal that reminds us that good cooking has never depended on expensive ingredients. Other wartime cooks filled marrows with macaroni cheese or minced meat. If I were making that version today, I might use soya mince instead, but this lentil and herb filling is surprisingly delicious. Perhaps marrows deserve rather more appreciation than they receive today. Once I've eaten more than I should, and put the rest away for tomorrow's lunch. There's the familiar rhythm of washing up. My old butler sink has been standing in kitchens like this for generations, and somehow it makes even an ordinary task feel connected to all the people who have stood at similar sinks before me. As I use my pretty 1930s and 40s vintage china, I don't have a dishwasher, which would cause the beautiful bright colours preserved for nearly a century to fade. Daily life isn't really made up of grand occasions, it's made up of these small moments. Preparing food, washing dishes, looking after things, putting them away ready for another day. Finally, I make a little space for the newly polished silver among the other teapots. It seems only right that beautiful things should be used and enjoyed rather than hidden away until some imagined special occasion. Perhaps that's what I've been thinking about all morning. The people who lived through the 1940s weren't searching for a perfect lifestyle to display to others, and they weren't replacing functional things with something new. They simply understood how to care for what they already had. A neighbour's surplus vegetables became lunch. A tarnished teapot became beautiful again. A well-used kitchen quietly carried on doing exactly what it was built to do. There's a kind of richness in that way of living that has very little to do with money. And perhaps in our busy modern lives, it's something worth bringing back. Thank you so much for spending this quiet cottage day with me, my dogs and my rabbits. And I hope you will come back to visit us next week.